All right, welcome everyone to I guess what's going to be the final live stream for October. I was just watching that intro and I realized I should probably shorten that up a bit. I don't need I created the buffer so that I could make sure I had my streaming figured out. And since moving from OBS to I'm on StreamYard, things are a little bit easier. So maybe I'll shorten that up. Joining me today is Danny Quist talking about offensive security, open malware. And I think what's going to be a really interesting conversation. If you're like me, you've just over the years come to depend on and maybe not even realize how much you depend on platforms like Abuse.ch and Malshare, and even GitHub for places to get access to malware. And it definitely wasn't always that easy to not only find samples, but then to use those to help support learning, reversing, creating detections and rules and all sorts of different tentacles that had. So I'll get Danny on here just a moment. Before we get started, I just have one announcement. I'm actually really excited to share this with everyone. I just launched today a new podcast with my employer, Google. It's called Behind the Binary. You can find it on Spotify and YouTube and most of the podcast platforms. They're populating today. I'm very much new to the podcast world. So if you don't find it on your podcast platform, likely it'll be there within the next 24 hours. The idea behind the podcast is I wanted to capture all of the stories and the people and the events and the behind the scenes to all of that. I feel like as a community and as an industry, we're really great at publishing and sharing technical details by and large, but we miss kind of the human aspect of that oftentimes. So that is the goal with the podcast. The first episode the guest is Nick Harbor. Nick was one of the technical writers and reviewers for PMA, Practical Malware Analysis. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. Long time an early incident responder and reverse engineer on what is now the Flare team. One of the first few folks to start it at Mandiant and is still there now through the acquisition by Google. Been instrumental in the development and the ongoing Flare On challenge. So I think a very timely episode if you're currently embarked on the Flare On challenge. And there's just a bunch that we cover there. It's about an hour-long podcast. So would really appreciate if you have time to take a listen. Really hope you enjoy the listen. Reviews really will help as well to help get this podcast off the ground, and ratings. And then, of course, if you have any feedback for me, I am always all ears. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of if you have anything that you'd like to let me know of. But you can find this Behind the Binary is what it's called. And I guess it's kind of a spinoff of Behind the Music if you're of that vintage and you remember that from VH1. That really wasn't what I had in mind when I came up with the title, but I kind of connected the dots after the fact. So you can find that Behind the Binary on all of your favorite podcasts. Okay, well, with that, I'll bring Danny on stage here. Danny, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I feel obligated to say that on every virtual call. It's just like those early days of having a cell phone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
It's good practice.
Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time in Microsoft Word lately, and I find myself also compulsively Control S because I'm just still terrified that I'm going to lose a big chunk of work. So
the old ways die hard.
They do, yeah. Well, welcome, Danny, to the podcast, to the live stream. Thanks for taking time to join. I guess we've gotten to know each other quite a bit here over the last couple of years, and so it's been interesting to know. Just every time I think I know a little bit about you, something else comes up, and I learn a little bit more. So that's been really great. I'm really interested in what we're going to talk about today with open malware and offensive security. Maybe before we get there, though, do you, for anyone who doesn't know you, want to provide a little bit of background, what you're doing now, and maybe where you were, what got you into reversing, and kind of where your career has led you?
Sure. My name's Danny Quist. I am a reverse engineer. Currently, I'm the CTO at a startup, Unit 129, which we will. We're doing great things with malware that I'm sure everybody will hear about real soon now. As far as how I got into this field, a lot of it, I mean, that goes way back, but I've been collecting computer viruses since I was working at a computer shop when I was 16. We collect the floppy disks and look at them. I didn't know what to do with them at the time, but that was there. Started started my career working for well, first job was with IBM, and I spent most of my time watching all the shenanigans going on at DEF CON, wanting to get involved.
Okay.
And, 9/11 happened, and so I joined the government and was there working at Los Alamos National Lab, and I was part of one of the first security groups there. It was just starting to become a thing, but back then it was basically like camping. You get like text logs, and you would get grep, perhaps sed and awk if you were fancy, but that was about it.
Okay.
And yeah, it was not a good time. There was antivirus, of course. Like antivirus has been here like a plague from the beginning, so that's that was one of them. But it was very ineffective, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was basically my start, is doing incident response and learning how to do reverse engineering that way.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be the story, for anyone who was able to get into reversing early on. I don't know. I guess whenever, to me, it seemed to hit at least I don't know if a critical mass is the right word, but a national, or like it got on the consciousness of people in computer technology in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And so it seems like, I can say I benefited from a lot of that early pioneering work, because I really didn't get into reversing proper until 2012, 13. And so it was a little more mature at that point in time. There was blog posts and YouTube videos and books that you could actually pick up and read. So
yeah, there was no Cyber Yeti back
then.
So
yeah. Well,
content, which I'm jealous of. This is you've been doing very good work with all of that. So.
Oh, well, thank you. It means a lot. And I guess that's just part of how I've been trying to pay it back, pay it forward, pay it back, however you want to look at it. So, because it was so instrumental for me to get my help to get me where I'm at. And so, yeah. So, I guess we could, there's a number of things we could talk about. I have no doubt you and I could fill an entire afternoon of just rambling. And I have a tendency to ramble with people, certain people. And I think you fit that category for me. But what we're here to talk about is open malware and offensive security. And I'm not sure if I'm quite clear on the difference between the two at this point. So could you maybe help set the stage a little bit for anyone that's looking into that right now, those projects? And then could we maybe, talk about the history of it and why they became projects and what their importance were and their role was?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, back in the day, the early 2000s, there wasn't a whole lot of resources that were there. And in particular, if you wanted to learn how to reverse engineer malware, there was a lot of gatekeeping in the community. Certainly the antivirus community, they really took the whole malware as a pathogen, and that any touch with it or any casual contact with it is going to, infect you and all of your stuff and drain, give you actual diseases and that sort of thing. And it was, it was pretty bad. And there was just nobody there. So, you were in academia. I wanted to go into academia, and I wanted to go into malware because I've always been interested in it, but I needed data. Right, you just could not find viruses unless you were doing some, back end trading on IRC, which I was, but for the most part, it wasn't there. So the thing that really like settled all this and like created the project was two things. Number one, we saw the Metasploit project, and we were very inspired by what they were doing, and for a couple of reasons, right? So the education component was a big thing for us. So, and Metasploit was really interesting because not only did they give you shellcode that had things like comments and people that would answer questions about how they wrote it, but they would also have like techniques for writing it, and it was more of an education process. So yes, you did get to pop shells on boxes, and it was wonderful and everything. But for me, like the interesting thing was the exploits, and I wanted to write exploits. So that's the big thing that we modeled it after. And 2003, 2004, realize this is dating me, but there were two big worms that came around. There was the blaster and the sasser worm. And this was right after Microsoft was running their mouth about how Windows was unexploitable and nobody's doing that. And then, suddenly the next year there was plenty of remote O days, and there were just problems everywhere. So Blaster was the first worm that came out. I believe it was exploiting one of the RPC bugs that was basically unauthenticated, run a command any way you want. And then the other one was Sasser, which was sort of taking that to the next level. But this was sort of back when malware was it was almost like a hobby thing for people. It wasn't like people were starting to learn how to make money off of it, but it hadn't quite crossed that Rubicon yet. But after this, it certainly did. So, and largely we were just trying to get a copy of any of the samples that were breaking into us and that sort of thing to learn it. So, great, we get a copy of the malware, but then what do you do to pull it apart? It's like the only resources back then were a bunch of things called crackmes. Have you ever done that? You're new to this, so I'm going to refer to you as the youth here. You've heard of crackmes?
Yep, of course.
So the idea behind it is that there's some sort of thing that kind of looks like game copy protection, and you have to break it.
Yep.
And typically, it's like there's an XOR key or there's something inside of that. Nick Harbour, who your guest on the podcast, who I strongly recommend and will be tuning into.
Thank you.
With Flare on, he does a great job with that. I think he's kind of like the spiritual successor to that whole process, that and the team. So thank you for running that. But that was the only way to teach yourself. So essentially what you would do is you'd figure out how to remove fake copyright from these example programs. And then after a while, you either learned how assembly worked and function calls, or you didn't. IDA Pro was around, but it was very much expensive. Wasn't necessarily useful there. Ghidra was still locked away in the bowels of some skiff at the NSA, so there was no touching it. And so it was just, basically you had a hex dump tool and a text editor. So it was a lot like my Google interviewing experience. But that's all you got. You didn't have IDA Pro. You didn't have Binary Ninja, which is better than IDA Pro, that sort of thing to work with there, and it made it difficult. So learning how to do it was hard. So luckily, we were working for the United States government under the the auspices of the global war on terror. There was a lot of money flying around for security, so we got to go to the Black Hat trainings. And we took some great ones. So Pedro Mamini, Aero Carrera, they had probably the greatest class that I've taken on this. Took Halvar Flake's class. I was lucky to be able to attend those foundational people in the field and get to know them a little bit and see that it was actually a much more accessible career than was being represented. So the problem was data. And so we needed to collect data. We were doing the backhanded type stuff, and then not backhanded, but on IRC asking friends and that sort of stuff. So eventually we collected enough to make a website. So that's how it got started, is that we just basically got a $5 free BSD box and started publishing stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's oftentimes the phrase necessity is the mother of an invention or something along those lines. And I would imagine because there really wasn't anything else to share, was there? I mean, I looked it up because I was curious where VirusTotal fits into all of this. And best I can come up with is they were a project in 2008, 2009.
Right.
So they came a little bit later, I would imagine. And again, I didn't work with VirusTotal in those early days. So, but I would imagine they had a similar motivation, although I don't know if I would say that they're all about sharing as much as they are just about trying to classify.
Similar technical things. First of all, had a great relationship with the VirusTotal people. They were awesome, very open community. Once I actually broke into this and got to know people, it was great. And the VirusTotal people were good. I believe Aero was involved somehow back then. I think it was HISPASEC was the company back then. But, I mean, they were very, very good. But VirusTotal actually fills a very needed gap, which is that you need access to just the most raw, up-to-date malware samples that are out there right now. So, when I look at malware, one of the first things that I wonder is, am I the only one that's being hit by this, right? And VirusTotal lets me see that, or at least lets me see if anybody else has uploaded it there yet. And so, we didn't have that back then. So, open malware was a little bit before there. We didn't necessarily have the resources that they had, VirusTotal. But we started out with basic PE analysis and virus scanning. So we would, we needed data. We got the data. We needed it labeled, so we knew which family it was from. So we did that, and then just basically made the results of that searchable.
How was the labeling done?
Really badly. So what we did is we scanned with about 5 different scanners, which I'll have trouble remembering. But we would
like little AV scanners.
Yeah, just antivirus. So Clam AV was definitely one of them, just because it was free and the command line worked. And I believe that there was a couple of other ones. Avast was another one because they had a good Linux client, and I think this was back in the day when McAfee also had one. So I mean, the clients were there. Everything was set up, so you just had to run them. And so basically, what we did is for our labels, we just used whatever came out of the AV companies. And so,
because I suppose even a spoiler, the next podcast episode will be Victor Alvarez, the creator of Yara. So I was just recently talking to him about Yara, and I believe that also was a late 2008, 9, 10 creation. So you didn't have something like, again, Yara, you look at today and it's like, Yara just feels like one of those projects and tools that has existed for the entirety of this profession. It's only been around for 10 years or so.
Good. Well, I'll have to go to that one because I have a question for Victor.
Okay.
So back when we started, PEID was like the signature mechanism that we had. I don't know if you've ever seen those things, but it's like you can identify hex strings, and then you can say that some things are variable bytes and that sort of thing. So it's very, very close to Yara. So maybe ask a question for me to Victor is like, was that inspired there? Was that related? Because that was there. But Yara came out. We weren't doing anything like that to begin with. It was just basically, it initially started out as we installed Drupal, that old blog website.
I shudder for reasons that we won't get into today.
This is a reasonable fear to have, Josh. Those instincts will serve you well. No, because it was awful. It was really bad, and it was like even back then we were fixing ODays inside of there, and we just assumed that everybody had a copy of our site and code and that sort of thing, which is fine because we were running open software, so it wasn't that bad.
Cool. So, and forgive me if I'm just drawing a blank. I'm having one of those days where I just seem to be in a bit more of a fog than usual. Collecting these early samples. Then when did you reach a point in this corpus that you said let's share this? Was there a certain number or amount of just raw malware samples?
It was pretty much right away. What was happening is that just like now, there would be a big infection or a big malware incident, and you'd want to go and look and see what was going on with it, or figure out what it was doing, or take a look at it just so you could speak confidently about it to management or something like that. And it just it was hard to find that. So what we did was a lot of subjective stuff. So this was all things that were third party sent to us. And that sort of thing. But, people would send us copies of the latest Storm virus, if you remember that one, or, those sorts of things. And we would make a post about it. We would do some reverse engineering of it, post a little bit of analysis, include the samples and that sort of thing. So it got to where it was pretty much taking off. What was kind of nice is that it was a really encapsulated lesson in how to scale data and websites and computer systems and that sort of thing. So we started out with Drupal, and the file system, or the way that we attach files and analysis and that sort of thing, was basically just a file attachment add-on.
Okay.
Which was terrible. And then, thanks to a lot of like contributions, I believe that, a lot of the Metasploit people were involved. We got our first file upload system put in, and, it worked. It worked for like the first 100 samples. People could type in a MD5 at the time and download it, and everybody was happy. And we added more and more in, but we started to get to some interesting problems. Number one was storage. So luckily back then, viruses were not very big. They were like 6K, 30K, and that sort of thing. So having like 1,000 of those was not a big deal back then. But we started out on like a $5 a month FreeBSD host, and then we had to move it to somebody's house on their cable modem connection. So there was a while where it was running off of that. And then, eventually, as we collected this and started to get some more problems, we started to run into problems like Linux really does not like you to have more than 16,000 files in one directory, or, anything inside of there, which is, something that I never really ran into before. And so we had to work around that and scale it up. And so there was a couple of like natural scaling points that were there, mostly around unique ID generation. But getting across some of those were made it there. But eventually we got to where it was about 4 million samples at the end, and then at the very, very end, we were at about 16 million, and that's when we had to cut it off, because there was a time when actually having the viruses was not much data, but then it became a random number generator at some point. And so like you just got things that were just like permutations of bitmaps inside of the icon file inside of the executable. And so at that point, it's like, okay, now how do you store this, right? Does it make sense to have 42 million samples of configure that is just slightly modified and that sort of thing? And so the answer was no. So, we had to do some A/B scanning at that point.
Sure. Was that it seems like especially a project like this where the goal is to be very open and for the community, by the community, then the critical mass of all the files coming in come from file uploading community? Or
it was 100%. People liked what we were doing. They contributed their own collections. And we would run a trading thing. Like I was trading hard drives with people at conferences like DEF CON was basically terabytes of data going back and forth as I met people up, and like I would trade our collection for somebody else's, and so start augmenting it that way. So it definitely was not a scientific way to do this. There was no, there's no vendor collection of data that would have made this like an actual, scientific purpose. This was just like what people would give us and what people would upload to our site. And so, there was a lot of junk in there, a lot of copies of Notepad and Solitaire and that sort of thing. Well, we'd catch them and then exclude them, but for the most part, it wasn't really there.
Yeah. Did you ever have any? Because I've seen with some of the platforms that I contribute to, they get what would you call it, spammed every once in a while, where someone will come by and just upload a whole bunch of stuff, which I imagine is to try to mix up detections and such. So did you see that kind of activity? Like were malware authors or threat actors or whatever we were calling them back then, were they watching the site and looking for their stuff to show up? Or did you have any indication of folks using it outside of the community that was trying to use it for research and good?
Yeah. So we actually went round and round. It was one of my co-founder that did this, but we went round and round with the malware author. So, it was one of these samples, and I'm having trouble coming up with the name of it, but it was one of these samples where we wrote up a quick analysis of it, put some basic stuff in there, and they said that like, oh yeah, this malware is really looks like my first Tinker Toy malware that somebody wrote, and it's not very good, and that sort of thing. And so the next time they released a version of this, we were actually mentioned inside of the executable, which I thought was like, oh, that's like legitimacy when you're starting to get called out by people writing these things.
Yeah.
So there. Yeah, it's that was poking the bear, but always from the beginning, we approached this with an air of respect. You know, look at it the way you want. Is like we all, we were trying to do defensive work and keep people off of the networks and that sort of thing. And the people that were writing this were doing it for their own reasons too. So we didn't like the malware. We didn't like that it was infecting it, but we did appreciate the puzzles and that sort of thing. And I think that that sort of it was sort of like a respect for your adversary that definitely permeated a lot of what we did.
Yeah. You can watch. I see it unfold on InfoSec Twitter, or at least the old InfoSec Twitter. Sometimes you'll have researchers that seem to really like to call out some of the malware authors, and I don't know. I've always been a bit hesitant to want to make the work become too personal, especially with nation states and cyber criminal organizations and other things. So, I think there's a healthy line there. As much as you may despise and dislike, the impacts of what these malware groups are doing, I think there's a healthy professional line, and everybody gets to choose what they want to do. But I've always tried to stay on the let's not make it personal side.
So Drew, from the comments, we tried to actively not poke the bear. That was what we were trying to do, is to get there and be a little bit respectful. So.
And the bear has to be poked to some degree, but
the only bears that we did try to poke were basically the security industry at that point. The SANs, they were, there was a lot of gatekeeping happening. So, you could go to their trainings and spend a lot of money on learning how to do stuff. But even if you took a lot of their exploitation classes and that sort of thing, they would always stop just short of telling you what you needed to be actually useful. And so a lot of it, you look at their malware course, and a lot of it is fitting it to the audience and that sort of thing. But a lot of it was that this stuff wasn't that complicated. Well, I mean, it was complicated because nobody knew how to do it. But once there was actual training out there and people were starting to see it, they could say, oh, now we see how this process works, and we can start to advance the state of the art of the field. And this was very threatening to a lot of security vendors out there. Number one, the antivirus community, who was just horrified that we were giving away free malware. And so we actually had some interesting takedown attempts. So before we started this, we were working very closely. I don't want to drop names, but some EFF people were very helpful. So they actually looked it over, and what was nice is that they'd just done this for Metasploit. So they had all the legal stuff looked at. So we knew that we were on okay ground. We put in some controls on it. So we didn't just let you randomly download it. So you couldn't just go and download a file directly off of the site. So they couldn't use us as a CDN or something like that to distribute it. We made you actually sign up with your email address and at least give us a fake thing and exchange emails with us and that sort of thing, just to limit that. And then watch for any sort of scraping. Scraping was kind of the big cost inducer, is because everybody was trying to just take the malware. And so a lot of times we had to send notes to people and just be like, hey, send me a hard drive and I'll fill it. This will be much easier than you scraping it over my cable modem connection. And I'll just, that was the deal we had with anybody who wanted to scrape us, was that no, look, SneakerNet is much faster. Just make a hard drive appear and we'll fill it.
Yeah, I can about imagine. I just I was other online platforms that are hosting malware that provide APIs now. So it's a part of the deal, and there still isn't a strong barrier between creating the account and getting that access, because it's meant to be open. I can't imagine the amount of resources that go into serving that. And how much of it is just plain up, flat out abuse. So, I could imagine that was a big challenge. Was there any? I don't know how quite to ask this, but for those that were scraping, anything that was an obvious vendor or somebody that was coming after the data. that you can talk about anyway? I don't know. I would imagine you probably identified plenty of interesting.
Problem is, I started hanging out with a bunch of lawyers, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna cowardly refuse to answer that. But you've totally heard of them and may work for one of them. That was a thing. Like the big problem usually was like when we'd find these places, it's like once we actually found the person that was doing the scraping, which was really easy most of the time, because like we would get on IRC and be like, hey, does anybody know anybody that works at, fill in anybody doing security back then? And then they'd say, oh yeah. And then we could figure out who was actually doing it and then actually like make introductions and that sort of thing. So that was pretty helpful. But
So
I mean,
it was just more to help say, if you need this data, give us a hard drive and we can just, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just
makes sense.
save everybody some time and that sort of thing. So then I would do things like give them the copy of the scanning database and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Was anyone involved in the project? Did you have time or the need to start creating any of your own signatures, or was it just throughout the life cycle here, or the lifetime, depending upon the AV scanning and those engines and their signatures?
We flirted a little bit with doing the signature generation, but it turned out to be a very hard problem.
Yeah.
So, as you can imagine,
Yeah,
but,
I can imagine.
Like we would, we did flirt with doing some consulting work where we were trying to develop signatures, but there's just very, very complex things that just defied any signature generation and that sort of thing. So it was actually pretty difficult. But where we got a lot of mileage, which is kind of like going back to the original reason for starting the place, was that we wanted to help people understand this better. So it was a lot of training that was given. We would teach people how to do malware analysis and start to make these things available in more places. So, you mentioned practical malware analysis. I did review of that too, with, Mike and the crew. That was great. But basically just trying to help out and publish everything that we could at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long did the project run?
So I was just looking at archive.org. The first appearance was 2005. It started out with a post to Daily Dave, and started off by saying what we were doing, how we were trying to get it running, and that sort of thing. And then it took off from there. Like the heyday was kind of like 2008, 2009. And then, started going. It was running until about 2012. Was kind of like where it hit a big big political bump. And then after that, it was that's when the open malware transition happened, or the rename happened, and got going. But so it was almost 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and then I believe it was still running in 2019. But
oh, okay. Yeah, that is a good long time. Did you? Assuming then you mentioned, getting started, a lot of the complexity in analyzing the malware was just simply because there wasn't a lot of knowledge on how to do it. Certainly the tool set was probably a lot more limited than it is today as well. Did you see a shift in like obfuscation and packers, and like what were some of the major trends that you saw evolve in that time that you started to when you decided to, close up?
Yeah, that's a real good question. That was one of the big areas that I was interested in, was unpacking the obfuscation and that sort of thing, is removing that. And that's what I did my PhD dissertation on, was automatically doing that in various ways. And I think that, during that time, it was, in 32-bit Windows malware time, it was actually like a lot of innovation happening in software armoring, right? Call that a packer or whatever you like.
Mm-hmm.
That was when UPX has always been an institution. But that was like things like AS Protect and AS Pack, those sorts of packers. The MITA was a big one that everybody was losing a lot of sleep over. That's kind of when the like VM Protect started to come out, and that sort of thing. So it was just like this open and fertile field of things happening to like where there was a lot of innovation happening and working there. But kind of what I noticed, and I'd be interested in your opinion too, is that a lot of the the actual binary packing and that sort of stuff, you still see a lot of complexity, like in the video games and software. But especially during the 64-bit, UPX seems to be the big one. I haven't seen many of the other players actually active. So in many ways, it's a lot less complicated now.
Yeah,
So,
I've never been able to really put my finger on it because it's just all anecdotal for me. I get samples, I analyze them. If I can detect the packer or whatever, it's obfuscated, great. If not, I just unravel it. And I don't really have the time to typically go back through it and try to catalog or categorize it. VM Protect still seems to be a heavy hitter out there that causes a lot of headache and heartburn. I would say, again, very anecdotally, in the low criminal tier commodity malware stuff, you'll still see some of those old packers. UPX is still quite popular and modified UPX, if not, if anything else, just for an initial wrapper around a binary. You get other languages now. .NET, for example, is a really popular downloader dropper, and there's a number of different obfuscators and other things. Code flattening, just as like a general technique, seems to be quite popular because it again just adds a lot of complexity to tracing programs if it's applied in a very sufficient manner. So,
right.
There's still a lot of unraveling shell code. I would say there's a fair bit of just shell code usage. In fact, that's probably the only time I see shell code is in the context of some malware's execution chain, and not in any sort of exploitation, because I just don't come across things that use exploits a lot. Exploit kits, I always enjoyed those. Those are a thing from the past apparently as well. But that was about the only time, and usually it was shellcode in a Flash, some vulnerable Flash application that the browser was susceptible to. So, shellcode is just it adds its own complexity just because it's shellcode, and kind of I think preys upon those that maybe aren't as adverse or well adapted to it, and that it can just be really modular. We got a question here, Danny, if you're up for it. This is from Dash. I don't know the username. I'm trying to get better at making sure I recognize who the question's from, but it's on YouTube. And I think this is very much in line with what we're talking about. In terms of complexity, I guess those samples are much simpler in comparison with today's. How would you describe anti-analysis techniques that authors deployed?
Now versus then?
Yeah. Like packing is kind of I know we talk about packing like in this monolithic layer, but maybe it's not really an accurate way to describe it today. Maybe a little bit more appropriate back then. I don't know, but yeah, right. Anti-analysis compared to what you see today from what you saw back then.
Yeah, a lot of it is very similar. So back then, like really when you looked at a lot of the anti-analysis stuff, it kind of, not saying this is 100%, but for the most part, it boiled down to that: is debugger present? Check. It's like, is somebody watching me? And that was the anti-analysis thing. So in that case, basically all you did is you swap the PEB bit and then you were good to go, right? Mm-hmm. Or figure out a way to run the program without debugging. So that was one way. The VM-based packers have always been a pain, and obfuscators. That's basically it. But as far as reverse engineering goes, I've seen some of your training, but maybe I'm paraphrasing here. But you really had to focus a lot on the strings that you end up seeing. So most of it was around obfuscating and hiding that. But where I would, and most other people would actually have a way you could actually cheat at this, at deobfuscating, was that you could just let the program run and then grab onto it later. Mm-hmm. Right. So it would have all these complicated hiding bits and that sort of thing. But if you just let it run without watching it and then just grabbed it at some other later point, maybe when it hit an API that you were interested in, or, after some time period passed, you could dump it. And it was basically unpacked and deobfuscated. And I think that a lot of that still applies, like the let it run, see how it happens, understand it. And that sort of thing. And certainly there were a bunch of people that were applying a lot of heavy brain calories trying to decrypt and take a lot of these things out of there. But mostly it was just hitting with large hammer and seeing what broke off, and then like, oh look, analysis and research, and then we would run off with it.
Sure. Okay.
As far as modern things, I've been looking at a lot of Golang malware lately, and there's some obfuscators inside of there, but they're basically just doing the big thing. I think that like a lot of the IR based obfuscators are getting very interesting for a lot of the LLVM languages. But for the most part, you have to get at that level. But I mean, as far as sophistication, things have kind of gotten like a little bit easier, I would say. Maybe not completely so, but it's definitely not there. Where we still have the problem is like the sheer amount of it, right? How do you look at that much code and understand it and make decisions and do analysis on it within the heat death of the universe when you're getting 2 to 3 million samples a day? That's where things get complicated.
Yeah, for sure. And I know everything for the most part I look at, whether it's Golang or just regular old Windows PEs, strings and APIs. I mean, those are still the crux of hiding, and I suppose form the foundation of the broad anti-analysis. And then there's just a variety of techniques that get layered on top of that just seems to be ever evolving. Yeah, Drew, you mentioned Golang. Drew just was calling out that you gave a CactusCon presentation this year on Go malware. So Go is a beast, and if you're not real familiar with reversing Go, that's videos. I'll go find the link here and get that posted as well. But I think serves as a pretty good introduction to it. Go just adds a lot, and they're just big binaries. You were talking about size earlier. I don't know what the average size of a Go binary is, but it's not 1K or 2K or whatever you were talking about.
Now you're lucky if you get that thing under 10 megs.
Yeah.
But I mean, Go is another good example, right? Like once you get to the actual part that you care about, and Drew, thank you so much. You've just been very kind, and I appreciate that you like that talk. It was a lot of fun to make and give. But like so much in reverse engineering is all about finding the code that the malware author actually wrote, and not about the APIs and what sort of libraries that are inside of it. And so like back in the C day, you could sort of draw that delineation by using IDA's flirt database and that sort of thing to identify things internally, but or just removing the linked executables that were inside of there, the DLLs, and calling it out there. But with Go, they just put the whole entire kitchen sink in there. So a lot of times what you're doing is you're reconstructing the symbol table to be able to pull out the actual variables. It's like, okay, that's something I care about, and the rest of this is just like included nonsense from GitHub.
Right.
And that's the hard part. So that's my 2-minute how to do Go. Just find the original code.
Yeah. Again, we could talk, and maybe we'll save. We've had a couple of career questions, so if you're up for those as well, we'll save those for the end, because we could probably talk about those for a while. In fact, I'm starting to feel my mind drift already from the original topic at hand here. So we talked about the evolution of sort of the malware that you saw throughout the entirety of the project. The storage, was that really, I guess you mentioned some of the takedown. That seems like those weren't necessarily effective, though.
They were not. They were very disconcerting at the time, because like we were trying to do the right thing and do the service for the community, and then we got emails from very, very official sounding places like US CERT at CMU. That was a very mean email you sent me 10 years ago, or was it 20 years ago now? It was very, but people talk to them. So I actually got to know the people that are over there, and they're very good people. Their intentions were in the right place. Plus, they had enthusiastic people. That was one of them.
Was there, I know we're kind of maybe in a sensitive area, but was there a common theme as to the takedown request? Was it you're potentially harming users? Was it vendors that were just angry that you were invading into their territory, perhaps? Was it kind of all the above?
Well, you have to take the projection, but a lot of it is that there was a lot of ink and a lot of time spent on like computer viruses being the same as like pathological viruses, like actual, biology. And so everybody was just afraid to touch these things and that sort of thing. And just by creating this fear, I assume it helped the marketing. But there were some people that were like legitimately looking for distribution sites of malware on the internet and wanted to shut it down. So, I mean, we took steps to prevent our site from being used as that, but I understand where they're coming from. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of strange. I mean, I noticed when I was teaching in academia, I taught undergrad courses in malware analysis, and there was a perception that I could almost measure with all the students in the program. Usually, the first time that they really had to encounter malware head on, asking them to do technical write-ups, and they'd make these grand leaps in logic that malware was just magical, and that once it was on the system, it could kind of do whatever it wanted. And I was always a little surprised about that, because no, it's like, you have the program, you're reading the code, you know exactly what it's doing. If it's doing something magical, it's because it's probably got, or it's abusing something, or maybe it's exploiting something, or maybe that's just how the operating system works, and that's what we're trying to figure out here. And so I could see how, more broadly, again, across the industry and other industries, it could very easily become a scary and just, let's get rid of these opportunities for these things to spread.
Right. Well, and just trying to talk about this, like trying to do this in any professional manner was just completely out of the realm of possibility too. Because, you work with a lot of these places and you're like, okay, I would like to set up a lot of commercials or a lot of software on your internal network that actually looks at live malware. And I would like it to be internet connected so I can do queries on it and, look into infrastructure and that sort of thing. And the answer was just universally, no, you can't do that. You can't have this here. This is unacceptable risk. And it was like, you have to take steps to make this work. But that seemed to be lost on a lot of bureaucrats. So
yeah, okay. Did you ever run into? I've always been curious about, someone who shares malware as well, but not on a scale like you were or any of the other current malware sharing platforms. Did you ever run into issues then from like let's call them consumers of the data? Hey, I downloaded something from your site and now I've got an infection in my corporate network because I was trying to study it.
Right.
Yeah. Did you run into that? And if so, or if not, like, how did you, what steps did you take to prevent it? Were there any steps you could take to prevent it? Because I've always kind of had the suspicion that sharing malware is on the edge of this gray area of, I think it's absolutely vital. I'm glad we do it, but I don't know. Maybe it's caused some issues along the way. It probably has.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the continued sources of entertainment that I have is watching the VX user group wearing their shirt. I give them money. Feel like they're doing the good work now. But I love watching their Twitter, because it's just like one bad joke reference about the password to their malware after another. And I almost don't want to say the password here just to like keep the mystery of this not known secret. But just like with us, we did have a couple people that would come to us and say, hey, I'm infected with a piece of malware and I need help and that sort of thing. And we would help them. Like, people would come in and like, if they were screwed, I wouldn't just like let them float off into the distance and that sort of thing. I would like try to take the steps to make that happen. Right. And in some cases that was, people were just having problems. But in some cases, the problems that they were having was that they were on a lot of drugs and there was no helping them. So, it was kind of interesting to like sort those people out. But the legitimate people that came in and asked for help and that sort of thing, especially if they thought that they got it from us, we would walk them through it and then, verify that it wasn't there and that sort of thing. But really just having the password of infected made it so like even people who wanted to download the malware couldn't get it unzipped with the password of infected.
Yeah, I suppose that's why, I'm not really stopped and reflected on that much. I don't know why I would. But I do recall when I first started trying to get samples back in the day, there was, I think Malware Traffic Analysis is one of the places I like to visit. I believe he's been around, Brad's site's been around for quite a while. I guess I could pull it up. But yeah, I think that's where I first hit that stumbling block. Like, I got this archive. How the hell do I open it? And I dug around on the site, and he finally had it buried. And I think at the time it was like, if you don't know, go ask someone. It was like, okay, well, that doesn't help me. I'm new to the field. I'm trying to figure this out. I was a little frustrated. And maybe that wasn't his place. Maybe it was another site. But, I kind of get the purpose behind keeping that a bit of not a secret, but like, you really had to have some intention and know what you were about to get into before you open that archive and started playing around with what's inside.
Even on the download link, I would say the password is infected. And then I had a pop-up that said the password is infected. We'd still get questions. So it's like whenever I see that joke on VXUG, it's like, oh yes, I remember those times.
It's been years in the running.
That kept most of the people out. But then so we would exchange malware just by zipping it up and putting a password on there until some real jerk Sophos in their email scanner decided to start unzipping and trying passwords to unzip. And, one of the passwords they tried was infected. And it's like, okay, like at some point, us defenders have to be able to exchange malware with each other that does not involve, complicated passwords that everybody forgets.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I think that problem has kind of reemerged in the aggressiveness of our browsers and other cloud storage providers that are cracking password protected archives and blocking downloads. And in fact, because now I'm on Brad's malwaretrafficanalysis.net. If you're not familiar, Brad Duncan is the person that runs this, and that's why I've met Brad once or twice. So we don't know each other all that well. But anyways, if you go and read about the passwords he's using, he's had a ton of issues with his site and being able to share. And so he's had to come up with, I don't know if it's elaborate, but it's not the standard password anymore. So there seems to be a give and take. And we're a small group of people that are sharing malware for legitimate reasons. And so I can understand why we would ignored to a certain degree, but boy, it really is frustrating. I had CyberChef open in the Flare VM, and the Flare VM uses Chrome by default. I decoded a base64 payload that was just a PE file. Turns out it was Remco's. And then I couldn't download it from CyberChef because Chrome blocked the download from CyberChef inside of the Flare VM in a completely disconnected machine. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do to get this stupid PE file out of base64 on Flare on a Windows VM? I ended up going to Remnix and doing it. So
yeah, go to Linux.
Yeah, go to Linux. Okay, well, so the project, it sounds like the critical kind of like the transition point where you started moving into closing shop was just resources. You had a lot of data, and I imagine it just was taking an ever increasing amount of time to just simply manage the project, let alone keep it up and running, the financial costs. And so does that sound about right?
Yeah, that was there. I mean, there was a lot of people that jumped in and helped too. So Paul Royal was a hero of the site. He definitely helped us out quite a bit. And, he was doing malware research, a lot of hypervisor based things, and we got to chatting, and he had some resources that he could throw at it. So that helped the site go a little bit. But kind of like 2012, I got this job offer, and part of the job offer was that I would get grad students and then server support. So they were going to be able to completely support the site. We're going to have people to work on it. We could start to expand it out, add more storage, add more analysis, and start to do these things. And so I was like, this is just the perfect job. I got to sign up for it. And, they were willing to work with everything. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pack up. I'm going to move to Massachusetts. And then, the moving company goes, they move all my stuff onto the truck. And then I got a call from the lawyer and says, hey, this isn't a nonprofit. I was like, no, it is not. It is largely because that requires extra paperwork and, accounting and that sort of thing. And an LLC, you can just do taxes for an LLC. We never made money at it, or a lot of money. Like, it was just basically to cover hosting fees, but they were like, nope, you can't do that. That's conflict of interest. And I was like, well, I'll just give it to you. And that was unacceptable either. So the end result is that if I was to take a job, which I needed, I had to shut the site down, close my Twitter account, unregister the domains, and deregister any of the business stuff, which was fine. I was done trying moonlighting with it anyway. But shutting down the whole thing for a while, that really took the shine off of that. Needless to say, I didn't stay there very long, but I did my service and then left.
Yeah.
So,
it's it's I guess a common part of these elements to projects that are community driven and that don't charge anything, right? Open source or however you want to classify them, nonprofit, and that generating substantial income is usually the number one challenge of making it sustainable. So places that are doing it now, like Abuse.ch, I have a lot of admiration because
much respect.
Yeah, I can relate in some regards to the challenge that you all have faced, and it's a lot. It's tough, right?
Yeah.
And even if I'm contributing as an individual, I'm helping put the lights on or spin discs or whatever for a couple of days in the grand scheme of your project. So
yeah, like for a lot of those, like Abuse.ch, when they first started, and VXUG and that sort of thing, just throw them a couple bucks. It's expensive to do that, and it's kind of thankless to be able to do that. But it's really nice having malware. It's a little bit different time now because you can just go onto GitHub and get like classified, ordered collections of malware that are very complete and allow you to start doing this. But some of these more hot button places are there too, and if you're super rich now, you can pay for Virus Total, which is still very good and doing great work, but it's expensive.
Yeah, right. I mean, if I put myself in the position I was before I joined Google, I never had. I was actually only one place I had access to Virus Total, and that was when I was at HP, and it was very, very limited access. I was part of a Yara group too that had shared access, but you had to really make the case for the API that you were going to burn, and it went quick. And so it just always has been getting kind of into the field myself and trying to find samples to do exactly what you're talking about. I was in academia. I wanted to do research. I wanted to build classes around this. I wanted to know I was teaching correct things to my students. I was fortunate I could rely on places like Abuse.ch, but and even that though has grown a lot. The Malware Bazaar, for example, is a large platform of samples. I don't think that's been around for very long. So even then it was still challenging to find good samples. And I don't know, especially what got me into scraping. So I started doing some more scraping, but that's probably a conversation for another day.
That's advanced. That's advanced malware collection is doing the scraping. So
Yeah. I feel like I'm a caveman and I'm just out there with two sticks trying to start a fire. But it's actually been over the years now that I've been doing it. It's been I've been successful enough, I think, in finding the things that I set out to find, and more. So, yeah. Oh well. Let's see. We've talking for about an hour. What else should we cover? Is there anything that we haven't? I'm running out of things that were on the forefront of my mind. So is there anything else that you think we should discuss? If anyone has questions, comments are open. I'm just waiting for those to come in. If not, Danny, we had a couple of career questions, which I think is a good way to end the stream. So if anyone is no longer interested in career advice, maybe now's a good time to drop. Well, okay, so let's do that.
I feel like career advice has to come after a few beers, though. That's when you get the most accurate advice. So,
yeah, you probably do.
So your viewers don't have time to wait for that. So
yeah, it's a little too early in the day yet. Plus, it's a Wednesday. I don't know. Yeah. I guess I could have got a beer. I've got my energy drinks. Yes, I said plural. I've got a lot of bad habits I'm trying to kick. Yeah. So just one question here about career. I guess the gist of this is from hexadecimal on YouTube, is how do you know when you're ready to apply for a job, especially in malware analysis?
That is a great question. The first time somebody will pay you to do it. I don't know. So that's a glib answer. And just to like, there was another question a little bit later about certifications and that sort of thing. Like my big advice is just avoid the certifications. I'm sure that a lot of them are wonderful and they do a good job, but for the most part, the way that you know that you're doing this well is that, like, actually the very easy way to do this is to take some open research that's been out there. Find somebody who's published a expose on a sample, like take some of the CISA stuff, like the snake malware reverse engineering that they did. If you can reproduce their results in the CISA snake malware report, it's like a year and a half ago, something like that, you're ready for a job. But to be honest, like really what you need to do, there's reverse engineering for incident response, there's reverse engineering for threat intel, and then there's reverse engineering for writing exploits. So there's all these different types of things that where you get to the point where you're okay, but it's like, how effective are you at doing these security tasks? And in my mind, if you can reproduce a lot of the reports and like get to the same conclusions as they do, you're doing pretty good. What I found is, like, when I started reproducing a lot of those reports, you get to see the real sneaky stuff they leave out of these things that they don't necessarily want the general public to see. So it's kind of interesting to see what they do and then what else is there in there. So a lot of it is, just see how you do with this. See if you like it, right? If you like this and it's like something that's like, it just pulls you in and you want to get more into it, that's a great time to get started, because mostly what I find is just enthusiasm and people that are interested in this. And that's the hard part, is getting that.
Yeah. I would echo that. And Flare On, let me pull up a link here. That's another great opportunity. You can compete in it's a CTF, a capture the flag. You can compete in it. But you don't have to. You can use it 100% as just an educational thing. I think a lot of people do. And if you go to the Flare On website, you'll find, and it's just flare-on.com. You'll see all of the previous years, and all of them have write-ups. And so you can use those to do what Danny's saying. Grab the binaries, try to crack it on your own, whatever. There's a very distinct flag in it, so it has a very clear objective. You'll know when you get to the end, and when you get stuck, read those walkthroughs and help fill in those gaps. And don't feel like a lesser RE because you have to use the solution. It's an opportunity to learn, because I found in my time in this field that there's just a lot of things you don't know until you don't know them. And so sometimes it's just a matter of, once you understand how something works, or some technique, or some operating system internal quirk, well, then you know it, and it helps you and enables you for taking on bigger and better challenges. So
I have this problem with academic students that I'm teaching reverse engineering to, because they're so used to being harangued about cheating and stealing answers and stuff like that. But it's okay in reverse engineering. There's no such thing as cheating. Steal ideas. Just go nuts, kids. That's the big thing. It's like, look, we're just trying to stem the tide of against, and I guarantee you the people writing this are taking shortcuts and doing that same sort of thing too.
Yeah. A couple of comments. It's Hexen, I think is how they pronounced it, and one from LinkedIn. What is your assessment regarding the future of malware analysis, having in mind AI? I know we're getting a little off topic, Danny, but if you had any thoughts on kind of where AI is heading. I mean, certainly I've been playing around with it. I know internally we have some pretty large scale projects underway. It seems good, but it doesn't seem very complete at this point in time. I mean, scripting languages and others where it's a little bit easier for, I think, it to parse out what's happening. LLMs are doing a pretty good job. You start dealing with very complex or just highly obfuscated code, and it's a little bit more challenging. Binary Ninja has a Sidekick. I think that's the only like public major RE platform I'm aware of that has, and I haven't used it, so maybe I'm a little off on my perception there, but I'm pretty sure it's using some AI to help with the code analysis. So that might be something that you could just go check out and see how it helps you when you're in low level code.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a is a hot word. I think that like there's a difference between AI and machine learning and this LLM thing that we're doing right now. The big thing is that like a lot of these systems I've seen are all about taking these models that have been trained on human language and then using that to translate code. But as you just said, anytime anything weird comes up, or something that hasn't been discussed on Reddit or wherever else it's being trained from, you get a lot of like moonbat things going on, or useless stuff like saying, oh yes, this pushes a 32-bit value to the stack, and it's like, okay, that's not what I need. I need an IP address to block. Mm-hmm. You miss out on a lot of that. So I haven't really found anything that like can do comprehensive understanding of a program at the level that would actually be useful. But there's a lot of clever people that are going on. I think that one thing that'll help is if we get an embedding. Like we get great embeddings for human text language with like labeled data and everything, but finding labeled data for reverse engineering topics is it's kind of a manual process you have to work at. So we'll have to see. That being said, I'm very excited about the emergence of Skynet, and then I'll be here on the Singularity Day and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I found a bunker out in western South Dakota that hoping nobody can find me. Right. So I don't know. I'm still hunkered down. I'm still learning. I'm still cranking away in IDA and other tools, and so I think there's still a lot of opportunity there to still play a significant role as an RE, now and in the future, foreseeable future anyway. But I don't know. This stuff comes and changes fast, so it's hard to predict, and that's not something I right now I spend a lot of time worrying about. Where is the field going? I mean, things I can't control. I can't control where all of this is going. I can only react to it in some degree. And I mean, I try to chart the future a little bit just so I know how to position myself in my career. But it's hard. I find it really challenging right now. So I'm not sure.
I enjoy playing with the things, and as soon as they become useful, I will be a big proponent of them. But I just haven't seen it yet.
So great question. Let's see. Well, Danny, I think that's been a little over an hour, so we should probably wrap up today. Call our session complete, if that sounds good to you.
Sounds good.
Okay. If there are no other questions, this will be last call. Then I think we'll say our goodbyes here. Thanks everyone for joining the stream. Hopefully I was able to get all of your questions and or interpret all of your comments. I don't always get through all of them though. Don't forget to check out the podcast just launched today, Behind the Binary. You should be able to find it in most major podcast platforms, but I just pushed the publish button this morning, so it's still propagating and percolating out there. Would love your feedback, your thoughts, and help me, as this was episode 1, to shape the future. Outside of that, Danny, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story, your history on your projects. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. I know there's tons of things we could talk about.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing, and you're putting yourself out there and putting yourself in the public, and definitely appreciate it. You're making a big difference here. So I thank you from an old graybeard.
All right.
Appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I guess one last administrative item. Won't be any live streams for a while. I'm going to be traveling for a good chunk of November. So going to be a little break, but I do have several lined up here late November and into December. So stay tuned. You'll see a drop, but that's not my usual drop, and that I'm not going to resume. I am going to resume. I'm just going to be traveling. So until the next stream, everyone, take care.